Muda Yusuf is the Director General at the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry, and we're having this conversation around the state of the economy and the future of the Buhari's administration. Let's continue this conversation. Thank you very much. When we talk about tax, tariffs, forex, exports and imports, and the regulatory environment around these very critical issues where we're looking at increasing our revenue generation and trying not to burden those who are already paying tax, and use tariffs to also mobilize FX inflows while we're building local capacity. This looks like a very difficult issue sometimes to strike a balance that really makes everyone happy.
Well, it may be difficult, but if you have proper coordination among those managing the economy, it should not be a very difficult thing.
Who are those managing the economy here? What cooperate? Who are they?
We have the key
interministerial.
Interministerial. We have the key ministries. We have finance. We have trade and investment. We have the customs. We have national planning and budget, and of course we have the office of the vice president. That is the leader of the economic team. You know, and the central bank, of course. So there has to be proper coordination because all we need in this economy is to boost investment. That is what growth is all about. We want to stimulate investment at the SME level, at the medium enterprise level, at the large enterprise level, at the foreign foreign investors level, and at domestic investors level. It's all about stimulating investment. So when we are talking about investment, we should be asking, what are these various components of policymakers bringing to the table? If we are a tax man, what are you bringing to the table? It's not just about revenue. Because the approach of the tax authorities as we speak currently is a bit hostile, it's a bit intimidating, and it's a bit, can even scare investors. Because it's not functioning strictly within what you can call the global best practice. I'll give you an example. I mean, this idea of putting a lien on people's accounts, you know, freezing people's accounts for non-payment of tax and all of that. There have been so many instances of people who come to complain that there is no communication between them and the tax authorities. There is no people that have been served that you are owing so much. All you just get is a letter from your bank saying that your account has been frozen. Or the instruction has been given that your account should be debited to the tune of so much because you are indebted to the government on account of tax default. I mean, we don't do things like that. I mean, what is the proof that even the fund that is in the bank is the man's money? It could as well be a contractor, or it could have been a supplier whose clients have given some money to do. You know, we need to make things look better, and there are better ways of doing things. So the tax authority should see how we can bring tax to also support investment. If we need to give incentives, let us give tax incentives. Part of the reasons I don't agree with the IMF in some of its observations was that there should be an increase in excise duty. There should be the government should discontinue tax incentives.
Well, the government has said there's going to be a VAT on carbonated drinks. Already for alcoholic beverages and all of that, the excise duty is already there. Nigerian breweries paid about 25 billion last year.
It's already there. Yes. But we don't have something that will just be generic. If you identify specific, because we are talking about also encouraging investment. Manufacturing in this economy is not easy. If you look at the totality of what it takes to be a manufacturer, and for you to make progress in an economy, you also have to be a producing economy. Because in the process of production, you engage a lot of people within your chain, within your value chain. People will supply you raw materials, you need transporters, you need IT people, you need accountants, you need so many people for you to be a producer. And unless you create the environment for the person to produce, where will the jobs come from? So if you are dealing with players in this economy who are already burdened with so many of these problems, we have to take it easy with them as far as this tax thing is concerned. So if you give tax incentives, for instance, you have pioneer status, we have some other tax incentives that we give. We have the export expansion grant, the EEG. which has run into all sorts of problems. We have huge backlog now, which has not been paid. That has been going back and forth to National Assembly, to NEPC. Now we hear that it's going to the Debt Management Office. You know, so we need to create the environment for that to happen. And if you talk of tariffs, tariffs again should not be too focused on revenue. I look at the totality of federal government revenue. Customs revenue is just about 7% of the total revenue to the federal government. And if you know the pains that the private sector go through dealing with customs on account of customs wanting to generate revenue, it's mind-boggling. Because the damage they do to the economy because they want to generate revenue is much more than the revenue that is being generated. Because we are talking about encouraging investors to invest, to create jobs, to build an inclusive economy. There are some tariffs that are so high that it's making it very difficult for those who are in production to even produce. So we need to take a comprehensive look at the totality of our tariff regime to identify those items that are inputs into manufacturing, into production, that will help those who are investors in the economy. Let me give you one amazing example. In the last tariff review that was done, there is this tariff item, surgical and medical equipment. Of course, we don't produce this equipment locally. We are talking about access to health. We are talking about how expensive it is for you to access quality health care in this economy. And yet the tariff on that item was moved from about 20% to 70%. Why would anybody do that? Do we produce surgical equipment here? Do we produce medical equipment here? And we have pockets of things like that. So we need to have proper engagement with operators in the economy so that we don't have just one or two people sitting in Ministry of Finance and coming up with all sorts of tariffs. And we should also be conscious of the fact that when we talk about industrialization, industrialization is not just about increasing tariffs. It's not just about import prohibition. It's about building competitiveness of those industries. That is very important. And that is why emphasis on infrastructure should be number one.
Yes.
In all of these things.
Yes.
It should be the first thing.
So President Buhari's Belt and Road Initiative, industrialization, and all this will connect to get agri raw materials and the value chain. Do you think we're on the right course on that?
Well, we are on the right course, partially, I would say. Because, again, you need resources to be able to deal with these things. If you can't mobilize the resources internally within government, you should have a framework to mobilize private sector resources. That is important. Total capital releases, according to the last figures that we had, for capital budget in 2018 was 1.2 trillion. Total capital releases. What component of that actually went into infrastructure? Best case, maybe half, or maybe something close to that.
Yeah, but
what impact? How much impact will it get?
President Buhari is moving ahead with foreign loans and all of that, whether from the World Bank or from the EFDB, from the French and others, NSIA, to make sure that he lays this foundation, get the rails back, get the roads back. Do you think even though we haven't seen much of domestic private sector, local investment input into that?
That is very important. Because the beauty of an economy is about the involvement of your own people in that economy. Mainstreaming domestic investors is very critical to any process of economic transformation. That is why when we talk about economic growth being inclusive, that is what it means. There has to be a deliberate strategy to make sure that we get the local investors to be part of the process. They may not be top-notch. They may not be that fantastic. But you have to start from somewhere. Because it is through patronage that you can build their capacity. If there is no patronage, how will they grow? So it has to be a primary or a cardinal policy of government that in whatever we do, there must be deliberate policy of bringing the private indigenous players into the mainstream of whatever it is.
Is that
we are not saying we don't need foreign investors. Don't get me wrong. But you have to make sure that we mainstream the private sector players.
Is that what you want to see in President Buhari's second term? Is that part of what you would like to see?
That is part of what I like to see. We need to mainstream the private sector players. I mean, we have a procurement policy, for instance. We have presidential executive orders that talks about the fact that agencies of government should patronize what is made in Nigeria and all of that. But how much of that is being enforced? It is one thing to have a document, a very nice policy document. It's another thing to ensure implementation of such policies. So we should make sure that these things are actually implemented. And we have supermarket chains here and there. To have a policy that will say that, okay, a percentage of what is on your shelves will be made in Nigerian products. As a matter of policy. Because if you don't do that, it will be very difficult to deal with all this problem of unemployment. It's very difficult to have this economic inclusion. Economic inclusion is about domestic indigenous participation. If you are given intervention funds, identify those who are indigenous investors. You can give to foreign investors, but there's nothing wrong in saying that, okay, if you are an indigenous investor, we have a special quota for you. Why not? Because the indigenous investors are also disadvantaged when it comes to capital. Many of them cannot compete with some of these foreign investors in the financial markets. But if you have a policy to say that, okay, so much percentage of these intervention funds or this Nexin fund, BOI fund, has to go to those who are purely indigenous investors, it could make some difference. So these are policies that we like to see.
You would like to
see
promote
economic inclusion.
Would you like to see that happen in the auto industry, for example, for Innocent Motors and others?
It should happen to all investors. But there's a problem with the auto industry, auto policy.
Why is that so? We've been through this through one or two administrations.
The automotive policy has been there since 2013. And the whole idea is to encourage domestic production of vehicles. And on the back of that, the tariff on imported vehicles was moved from about 25 to 70% for new vehicles. That's why new vehicles are so costly these days. Tariff on used vehicles and commercial vehicles was moved to 35%. And what this has done is that it has made vehicles very, very costly, very prohibitive in cost. It has increased the cost of transportation. It has impeded the need or what you can use to facilitate domestic economic integration. Because part of the way you can get value from a big economy like ours, that is also geographically very vast, is to promote domestic integration of the economy. Where people can move from Sokoto to Port Harcourt, to Aba, to Onitsha, to Ogbomoso, to Ibadan, to Lagos. That is very important. Because that will help to increase the velocity of transactions. And it has a way of impacting significantly on the economy. The 90% of freight and movement of human beings today is by road. And you need vehicles to do that. You need vehicles to move your raw materials from whether the port to the factory, from the farms to the city, and all of that. If the road transportation is that strategic to an economy, why will you move the tariff to 35%? Why will you move the tariff on new vehicles to 70%? Now, 6 years down the road, where are the made in Nigerian vehicles? What is the local content? We don't produce tires. We don't produce batteries. We don't produce a windscreen. What exactly are we producing? So we don't climb a tree from the top. You climb a tree from the bottom. Let us encourage industries in the auto industry space that can produce spare parts to start with, to service almost 10 million vehicles or so that we have on the road. You know, we have to begin from first principles, as they say in mathematics. You start from that basics, and you begin to build up. You don't start from the top. How do you say you want to produce vehicles?
So our current industrialization policy, of course, which embeds auto industry, do you think it needs a bit of revisiting, or in terms of implementing what's already on paper?
It needs to be revisited.
As a total
because
document.
the emphasis, as a strategic document, the emphasis of industrialization now is on how to ban products, how to put products on a 41-item list, how to exclude people from foreign exchange market, how to increase tariff. This may be complementary to some more fundamental things, but that is not what is going to deliver sustainable industrialization.
So you're talking about the fundamentals here? The
fundamentals. And if you look at the Nigeria Industrial Revolution Plan, the emphasis in that plan is about what you call resource-based industrialization. Your industrialization policy should take a cue from the resources that you have in abundance. That is what can make the industries very competitive.
Namely, oil and gas,
for instance.
Agriculture, solid minerals,
and things like that. Even things that require a lot of labor. Labor is a big resource here. So if you have a labor-intensive industry, that is good for our economy.
Which are automobile, textiles?
Automobile is not so much of labor-intensive. Maybe textiles, maybe even all these garment industries, fashion designing, entertainment, all these things. IT, a lot of things can happen in those spaces. So we have to look at the resources you have to be able to drive your industrialization. And that is what will make your products very competitive. That will make it possible for you to be able to fit into some global value chains.
So we spent so much of this conversation, Mr. Yusuf, around the federal government. So where do we get the subnationals or state governments into the entire conversation? And I've been on social media over the last couple of hours with some folks talking about Tinapa in Cross River State and the Ubudu Ranch and Calabar itself, looking at tourism, and how do we get subnational state governments to be part of this economic game-changing that we all push almost all the time at the table of Mr. President, when perhaps some of this could be done at the level of the state governor?
Well, I don't like to use the word restructuring. But for you to get the state governments to be part of all these processes, we need to make this a truly federal state. We need to have what they call true federalism, so that the states will have some control over the resources in their domain.
You mean they can't do anything with the current resources they have?
It is very difficult.
Why is it so difficult?
Let me give you an example. If you have a solid mineral site, for instance, in your state, for the license is not even issued by you as a state government. You don't have right to issue license to an investor on solid minerals. The license will have to come from the federal government.
I like your example. But if I'm a state government of about 2 million people in population, but my monthly FAC allocation is about 10 billion naira, where does the money go? What do I do with the money?
Well,
8 billion naira is a whole lot of money on this.
It's a whole lot of money.
So where does the money go? Even if we're going to share, I'm going to share it among 2 million citizens of my state.
You see, let me tell you, many of those states, when they collect the FAC allocation, by the time they pay salaries, practically the whole money is gone.
Why would 8 billion naira go, Mr. Yusuf? Because the entire state population is 2 million. If all of them are in civil service, including the kids who are in school, 2 billion to 8 billion is enough to go around.
Cost of governance.
How much is the salaries, by the way?
Cost of governance is a big issue in this
economy. So we need to separate salaries from cost of governance.
It is a
we need to separate the two. Because salaries to some folks are just 30,000 less, whatever, and all of that.
But you need to look at the number. You need to look at the payroll of some of these.
In a state of 2 million people, how many would be on your payroll, Mr. Yusuf, for 8 billion naira?
You see,
1 month.
That is an issue. The number of people on the payroll, the number of political appointees, and of course there are issues of leakages and transparency in the management of state finances. So it's a combination of factors.
So if we give state governments more money, you think of true federalism, they should be able to do more? You think they'll be able to do more?
I think they should be able to do more. I think they'll be more creative. I think they'll be able to run their states in a competitive way to be able to attract investors.
Let's take a break. We'll be right back into everyone.